Clear prop.
Star 738 Yankee number 2 following twin traffic, 3 mile final, clear Sutton. 1 Charlie Bravo, exit in runway 25, going 4 mile final.
This is Behind the Prop with United Flight Systems owner and licensed pilot Bobby Doss and his co-host, Major Airline Captain and designated pilot examiner Wally Mulhern. Now let's go Behind the Prop.
What's up, Wally?
Hey, Bobby. How are you?
I'm fantastic. This week we're going to talk about something that I'm sure some student pilots dread. I know it wasn't a favorite topic for me, and there's this question of practicality in the real world, but let's talk about compass errors this week. One of our listeners sent us a note and said, hey, can you do a show on compass errors? And we've discussed it a little bit, and we think we have a good show put together here for everybody. We're going to kind of break it down into a few parts. Talk a little bit about fundamentals, talk a little bit about how compass errors might present themselves on a written exam or potentially in your oral portion of your check ride, both for private and maybe instrument. And then we'll talk a little bit about how to take advantage of some things in the real world that'll make you a much better, safer pilot as it relates to some compass errors in the future. Wally, as a DPE, I'm sure you talk a lot more about compass errors than I do, and probably the average human being. You're a big fan of math as well. Tell us just first blush kind of what your thoughts are at a high level, without giving away everything in the show, where your head sits as it relates to compass errors.
Well, the way I look at it is compass accuracies. Okay, so when is the compass not correct? When is it correct? And you could say, well, it's correct when it's not correct, if that makes sense. So one question I will ask on most of my instrument check rides is, when is the compass accurate? And the answer I get most of the time when I ask that on the ground portion is in straight and level flight. And that's not quite all of the answer. The correct answer is straight and level unaccelerated flight. So if we take that and we say, okay, the compass is accurate in straight and level unaccelerated flight, well, that means that it's inaccurate if we're turning, if we're climbing, if we're descending, if we're accelerating or decelerating. So I think if we know that, and also know that navigation is not an exact science. If we're off a degree or so, I mean, we would like to be right on, but heck, how can you read a degree or two on a compass that might be bouncing around in the air? So again, just know that the compass is accurate in straight and level unaccelerated flight.
Yeah, and I think part of this is the same thing with GPSs and the Magenta line, and we've all gotten a little comfortable in a digital age, and I've been very candid that I think navigation was one of my weaker spots when I was a private pilot, and don't think I really got to where I could navigate well until I was an instrument pilot. But the compass is a non-digital tool. Now there are digital options, and there are slaved options, and before we started recording, I talked about I don't know that I've flown a plane without a slaved compass or heading to a compass, digital compass, in a long, long time. I don't know that I've fixed the heading indicator based on precession in a long, long, long time. And I think that makes me probably not a very good pilot in an older plane, right? If I jumped into one of my older aircraft, I might be heading in the wrong direction unless I looked at the compass and fixed my heading indicator.
Yeah.
We talked a little bit about a clock, the fundamental of a clock, and that ATC often will tell us to look for traffic at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock. And then we both started challenging ourselves, and we're not really 1,000% sure our kids know how to read an analog clock.
Right.
So there are some fundamentals that we all need to understand. And we'll talk about a clock on another show or something, but think little hand and where it would be positioned. But the compass, it is a confusing tool, simply for 2 or 3 different reasons. One, if you have a normal floating compass, for me, it was always backwards, right? The way the magnets work, the way it turns is sort of opposite of what you're visually seeing, right? You're turning left to a heading from north, see 360 or 000, you're turning left to 330. Well, on the compass, 330 is on the right. You can kind of see it just out of the window there. And that's the way it's going to turn based on where the magnet is in that compass, right?
Right.
And I think that confuses people. The basics of the compass are pretty rudimentary and simple. We've all probably used one. So let's talk through the compass errors, and then let's try to save some people some trouble and talk through some real basics on how they can use other tools to make really good safe turns. So with that, let's talk about through the person that sent something in. I really think they were hoping for us to help them kind of come up with some tricks to pass a test, maybe get through an oral exam, be able to talk intelligently about the compass. And for those of you that like acronyms, VD MONA is the phraseology that I probably learned, that I've heard other CFIs use to help people memorize what all compass errors there are. VD MONA stands for variation, deviation, magnetic dip, oscillation, northern turning tendencies or northern turning errors, and then acceleration and deceleration. So let's just take them quickly at a high level, one at a time, talk through things that happen both in a testing environment and then the real world environment, and then we'll go to the next part. So variation, a little bit about variation. Wally, you just said when you sat down today, you flew all over the country. You flew from here to San Francisco to Boston and back to here, I believe, right? You went through a lot of variation.
Yes.
In the real world, how many times did variation come into play in your navigation to and from all those locations?
Real world, zero. Yeah. And a lot of people just don't know what variation is. And so let's use the example of a basketball. Okay, we can all visualize a basketball sitting in our lap. Let's pretend that that's the Earth. Okay, and so let's say you pick a point at the very top of the basketball, and we're going to call that the North Pole. Well, the Earth actually has two North Poles. We have the magnetic North Pole, and we have the true North Pole. So the true North Pole is the very top point of that basketball. Well, over years, and I don't know what causes this, but the magnet that's inside the Earth has gotten a little bit lopsided. So where our compasses point to, the North Pole, and where the actual top of the Earth are off a little bit, and that actually changes. So the angle between those two poles is what variation is, and it depends on where you are, how much that variation is. Now down here in Houston, Texas, the difference between those two poles is very minimal. At most, it's around 2.5, 3 degrees, and if you get a little bit east of here, maybe the panhandle of Florida, I believe the variation is zero. So the poles line up at that point. But if you get up very close to the poles, that angle could be very far away. I mean, it can be significant. Up in Alaska, you might have variation, of 20 some odd degrees, and it's a big deal. It makes a difference. But anyway, that's what variation is, the difference between magnetic north and true north.
And true can be simply thought of as like latitude and longitude lines, those
right.
almost perfect lines on the map. That,
right. The top of the ball, the very top of the ball.
And so if you say Houston, we're 2 or 3 degrees off, I'm a student pilot. I'm working on my flight plan. I'm going to meet Wally. I'm nervous as can be. I've got this great flight plan I found online or from my flight school that I go to, and I've come up with all these numbers. And the pretty early on in the list of things I'm solving for is variation, right? So if I know I got to fly a heading of 330 to get to my destination for my check ride, and I subtract 3 from that, then now I know it's 327 and I'm in a good point with my variation. Is that what we're teaching here?
Right. Yes, absolutely.
And depending on where I am, that may change, and it could change as I continue to transverse the United States if I'm flying. But as you said, in the real world, your big jet not really in play for your trip.
Right.
Next one is deviation, and this is one that I think we learn and we quickly forget, and I think very rarely do we look again at this. But there is a compass card in all of our small aircraft that we use, and deviation is created by an avionics person who really comes out and they quote unquote swing an airplane, and as they swing an airplane, they're checking to see when it's truly pointing at what should be a magnetic heading of 360. What is it really doing? And that's because of the electronics in that aircraft, or the metal in that aircraft that has created some sort of a magnetic draw on that compass. If you've probably given a lot of check rides, Wally. You ever put your iPad up on that cockpit, that sunscreen, and that compass swing 30 degrees?
Yeah, all the time.
Well, there's a lot of electricity and magnets and things in that iPad that are making that happen, right? And throw 2 iPads up there and it might start just spinning in a circle. Who knows? But any change in metal, avionics of the sort, the airplane operator and owner should have that plane swung again, put a new GPS in there. You really should change that compass card. But once that compass card has been set and the avionics don't change, metal doesn't change in that aircraft, that compass card never expires. It should stay the same for a long time. Now, we talked a little bit about variation and now deviation with the electronics. I did hear that some runways actually change their numbers over time based on variation.
They do.
Have you ever seen a runway change its number?
Oh, yeah, all the time. When I first started flying out of Houston Intercontinental Airport, the big runways were 1-4 left and right. Now it's 1-5 left and right. So
wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, and it seems very strange. It seems like Las Vegas just recently changed their numbers. It used to be 2-5 left and right. Now I think it's 2-6 left and right in Las Vegas.
Interesting. So constantly changing the variation piece. Deviation changes if we put something new in the aircraft. And I would do the deviation as well as part of my planning. Maybe it would take the 3 and turn it back into a positive. We talked before we started recording. I don't think we've seen a compass card with more than 1 or 2 degrees off on that reading. But it might be the inverse of whatever variation is and straighten things back up for you.
Right. Yeah, it could be.
Now, there's a number of other ones, and we're going to talk through these kind of as the Pilot Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge talks about them. But there's something that happens when we're not in straight level, non-accelerated flight that makes the compass move in a direction that would create an error. And in all reality, all of these things are temporary. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
So the magnetic dip, as an example, is something that happens when we when it dips towards the magnetic pole. And it's probably only going to be momentary when we are turning or we're accelerating or decelerating. And we want to know what we need to do to, on a check ride, you're going to want to know what you need to do to solve for some of these things that are happening. And there's 2 acronyms that I think everyone talks about as it relates to the turning errors and the acceleration errors, and that's UNOS and ANS. UNOS, which is undershoot north, overshoot south. And that's because we're going to be lagging a turn or we're going to be leading a turn. And I think the reality of all this, Wally, is people need to sit down and read this. They need to create some sort of a cheat sheet. They need to do something to help themselves get through a test. We could explain it the way we learned it, the way we know it, and it might not click for everybody that's listening. But I think the cheat sheet, coming up with a way to where you can sit in front of a computer and answer some questions. If you're heading on an easterly heading and you decide to accelerate, what's going to happen to the compass? And I think that the memory aids are what's going to be the kicker for students passing a test. Any tips and tricks that you would want someone to know in a check ride type setting, or that might help them get through a written exam, Wally, that you would pass along to the listeners?
Well, I think ANDS is a good memory aid. It's ANDS, and what that stands for: accelerate north, decelerate south. So on an easterly or a westerly heading, if you accelerate, the compass is going to show a turn to the north. If you decelerate, it's going to show a turn to the south. Now, having said all that, how do we use that in practicality? Well, when I was doing a lot of instrument instruction a long time ago, again, the drum that I kept beating for my students was the only time that this is accurate is straight and level unaccelerated flight. So first of all, if we're on an easterly or a westerly heading and we accelerate, we've already told ourselves, because we're not unaccelerated anymore, we're accelerating, that compass is going to be inaccurate. So accept the fact that it's going to do some strange things. If we're on an easterly heading and we are speeding up and we're keeping the wings level, we should be maintaining that easterly heading. So wait till you are not accelerating anymore and take a look at your compass. So it's a little bit like eating. If I go and I want to eat some food, I order an omelet and I taste it and I feel like it needs salt. What do? I throw some salt on it and I taste it again. If it needs some more salt, I put a little bit more on it. I'm not sitting here and calculating how many grains of salt I need to throw on that omelet. I'm using my taste buds to figure out, a little bit more. And the same way with flying. I mean, put it on the heading, let everything settle down, take a look at it. If it's not where you want it to be, add a little bit more salt to it.
And we talked a little bit about this earlier. There are other compass types. The vertical card magnetic compass is one that kind of cleans up some of these errors or reduces some of the confusion. Turning in the right direction looks more like a heading indicator instead of this floating compass that turns in what appears to be a backwards direction, etc. Many of us use tools, electronic flight bags, something of the sort, where we depend a lot on a moving map or a tool to calculate some of this stuff for us. It came up in my commercial check ride when I did all of it electronically, did my long commercial cross country with passengers and fuel stops and all that stuff. And the examiner, not Wally at the time, challenged me and asked me, how did this magnetic heading get calculated? And I think it is a slippery slope that I knew and understood that it was the winds that I had said helped me build this at that time, meaning I was forecasting to leave the next morning. I ran this the day before. Is that the forecasted winds? Is that the winds at the time? ForeFlight does it based on those forecasted winds, but that doesn't mean those winds are going to be the same thing. And there's no deviation in that because it doesn't know what my compass card in my aircraft says. So while fairly accurate, still not 100%. And then other things could cause a lot of problems, like winds aloft. If you are in the air and the winds aren't exactly doing what you forecasted them to be doing, and you got to constantly be adding a little bit of salt, maybe, to make sure you're heading in the right direction.
Right.
So how do we fly in the real world? I think that's the key. So compass errors, memory aids, take the test. It's all real. But today we have a lot of other tools in our bag that we should use. But in reality, this is like a lot of other things in aviation. It's a math problem, and we can normally figure out a good, safe way to turn without just using the compass and then verifying we're doing the right thing with the compass once we are straight, level, non-accelerated flight. So if you knew you had to turn, we'll go basic for a second. Well, if you knew you had to turn 30 degrees to the right, would you think about the compass first, or would you think about something else first?
I would think about a time. I would think, well, first of all, I know that a standard rate turn is 3 degrees per second. Okay, and if you ever forget that, if you're in an airplane with a 6-pack, look at your turn coordinator. Your electric turn coordinator, probably down on the bottom left, probably says 2 minute on there, 2 MIN. What does that mean? Well, it's a 2-minute turn coordinator, and what that means is that it takes 2 minutes to go a full 360-degree turn. So if you take 360 degrees, 2 minutes is 120 seconds. 360 divided by 120 is 3 degrees per second. So I know if I want to turn 30 degrees, it's going to be a 10-second turn. So I'm going to put the airplane in a standard rate turn. I'm going to look at my second hand on my clock, and for whatever reason, if that's not working or I don't have it, in my mind, I'm just going to say 1001, 1002, 1003. I'm going to count to 10. I'm going to roll wings level, and then I'm going to take a look at the compass. Now, one disadvantage that we have today is just the way our society has gone. When you say to me compass, when you say the word, what's a compass? I go back to being a young boy, and I remember, having compasses. And I can remember sitting in my room having this compass, and it was a little round thing, and it had a needle, and it pointed to north, and it had north, south, east, and west. And a lot of us today have compasses in our cars, but it's just a digital thing. And for all of you who have iPhones, you've got a compass app on your iPhone. I'd encourage you to take that out and play with that. And so when I think of a compass, I think of 360 degrees. I know that north is 360, south is 180, east is 90, west it's 270. And for you CFIs, one thing I would encourage you to do with your students to get them to try to relate to headings and courses is take your hometown, and for us, I'll use Houston. And I will say this to people. I'll say, okay, from Houston, Texas, about what is the course out to Los Angeles? And I would expect them to say about 270. Okay, about what is the course to New York? Okay, 040. About what is the course to Seattle? 330. And a lot of people just really struggle with that, just because they've never had to do it. They've never had to use that tool. So it might be something that you can you can quiz, and you can kind of challenge your students with, to get them to kind of start thinking in terms of a 360 degree compass. And I always use time turns. If I wanted to make a 180 degree turn, 180, 18 divided by 3 is 6. It's going to take 60 seconds. 90 is 30 seconds. 30 is 10 seconds. 10 is 3 seconds.
But that's not perfect math.
It's not perfect math. Navigation is not an exact science either. So, make that turn for the prescribed amount of time, roll your wings level, let things settle down, and see how it is. Okay, you just got the omelet, you've taken a bite, it's not spicy enough, so you put some salt on it, you've taken another bite, you might need a little more.
And it is all about those corrections, and I think winds play the biggest part in the constant need to correct in the grand big scheme of things, of course. But it's probably never going to be perfect. I think someone told me a story that if I was from Houston to New Orleans, if I was 7 degrees off, I'd be out in the ocean when I got there. Well, that's assuming that I never thought to check things again, right? I don't think we're going to fly a Cessna for 3 hours and not check and fix things.
Right.
So it's very unlikely that's going to happen in the grand scheme of things. So keep thinking big picture, keep making corrections. I love the time turned aspect of it. I think I sweated the compass errors a lot when I was a private student and an instrument student, and I knew time turns were a real thing, but I think I had to look impressive to a CFI and to a DPE. But you say it best. If that's not how I'm going to do it when I'm there with my wife and kids flying somewhere, do I really need to try and impress my wife with, hey, watch this, it's going to undershoot north just for a second, and then I get to and show off my compass skills? That's never going to happen, right? So
Right.
I'm going to turn towards Austin. I'm going to make sure I'm on the right heading, and I'm going to stick to that heading.
Yeah.
And throughout that entire trip in the real world, even with an autopilot and a G1000 and all of the whiz-bang features I have, the heading's constantly changing. The autopilot knows how to keep me headed in the right direction. And what I do is I keep hitting that heading bug, because I want to know that if all that stuff fails, that I know the right heading to fly to get me to Austin, even if I lost all that whiz-bang equipment.
Right.
Because that's the last thing it knew. But I'm still going to have to make adjustments, right?
Yeah.
In the grand scheme of things, you might not share all the details, but how many minutes on a normal check ride do you think you spend on Compass Airs, assuming they know the answers to your questions?
Not a whole lot of time. I mean, we do talk about it. It is important, but it's not something I'm going to dwell on. And again, the thing that I'm really looking for is to know when the compass is accurate.
And I think if on the written exam, we're talking a grand total of maybe 3 or 4 questions tops on the private, probably 1 or 2 if you're lucky. But it's a piece of aviation, but it's not one that is going to consume all of your learning for sure.
Yeah.
And then the real world, once you learn it and you're able to navigate, I think you'll use other tools and other tricks to help you get the answers to a lot of these correction questions. But you still need to know that the compass is hopefully always going to be there for you, and that if you need to go north, that you put that in on that window and fly that direction. You're going to be in pretty good shape.
Right.
With that, as always, fly safe and stay behind the prop.
Thanks for checking out the Behind the Prop podcast. Be sure to click subscribe and check us out online at BehindTheProp.com. Behind the Prop is recorded in Houston, Texas. Creator and host is Bobby Doss. Co-host is Wally Mulhern. The show is for entertainment purposes only and is not meant to replace actual flight instruction. Thanks for listening, and remember, fly safe.